You are listening to LBC, where we have, over the last few days, perhaps turned away from the escalating situation in Ukraine, because there is I don't know quite how to describe it. There's almost a sense of there's too much distance between us and events there, both geographically and metaphorically, and yet there really shouldn't be, because Vladimir Putin remains among the most powerful 2 or 3 people on the planet. And as my guest William Browder is in the process of explaining, you cannot begin to understand events in eastern Ukraine without also understanding that the corruption within the Kremlin, the relationship with truth, is so strained, so non-existent. You can't begin to understand his foreign policy without looking at just how rotten he is as a man and as a leader. William Browder employed a lawyer in Moscow, Sergei Magnitsky, who died in appalling circumstances, having been tortured by police who he had helped to expose in some cases. And Bill Browder remains on a mission to achieve justice, a mission that has enjoyed scant success, frankly, in Russia itself, and even in this country as well. I know the State Department in America has moved a little bit faster than perhaps our own Foreign Office has on this issue.
Yeah, so Sergei was killed in Russia in 2009. We had huge evidence of torture and murder. This was not speculation. This was not hearsay. This was documented evidence that he was tortured and murdered. The Russians refused to give us justice, and so we said, let's get justice in the West. And so we started to say, well, what kind of justice can we get in the West? And this particular crime of killing Sergei Magnitsky was about money. These guys stole a lot of money from their country. They stole $230 million of taxes from their own country. He exposed them. He was killed. And the guys who steal this kind of money, they don't like to keep it in Russia because it's not safe in Russia, for the same reason that it was so easy for them to steal it from their government. It could be stolen from them. So they like to go to the West. They'd like to come to London, to south of France, to New York City. They like to put their kids in boarding school and all this kind of stuff. And so we said to ourselves, well, the one kind of justice we can get in the West is cutting off the West, making it so they can't spend their money, that their money gets frozen and they can't travel.
This is another parallel then with the big picture at the moment with regard to sanctions and trying to do something that would harm the people in charge in Russia, and you hit them in the wallet.
Well, this is the one thing that we can do, which is, unlike the Soviet era, these guys, we're in a globalized world where you have a bunch of kleptocrats that like to travel to the West, that they love it. They don't like being in Russia. They like to steal in Russia, and then they like to party in the West. They like to come. Knightsbridge is full of Russian government officials, corrupt officials, with their girlfriends in their fancy cars, shopping at Harrods and Harvey Nichols.
And that will never get reported in Russia for the reasons that we touched on a moment ago.
No, exactly. So we said, let's cut off that. Let's make it so that these guys can't do that. And it took a while, but I was able to get the United States government to pass something named after my murdered lawyer. His name was Sergei Magnitsky, and it was called the Magnitsky Act. The United States Congress passed the Magnitsky Act. The president signed it, and which means that the people who killed him and people who do other similar gross human rights abuses can't travel to America, will have their assets frozen in America. And what's so remarkable is that Britain has refused to do it. And I'm a British citizen. My voice might betray it, but I'm a British citizen. I've been living here for 25 years. And Britain is the first port of call. My government is the first port of call. A lawyer working for a British company was tortured to death. And the British government, up until now, have refused to impose any sanctions. The people who killed Sergei Magnitsky can freely travel to Britain. They can spend their money in Britain, and the government refuses to do anything to stop them.
These are people who are banned from spending that money in America.
Yeah. So why is it that America doesn't allow them and Britain does? Because Britain, our leaders, currently don't want to upset Russia.
You touch upon an issue that has popped up during our contemplations of the current crisis in Ukraine, and which has been, I think Garry Kasparov, the former chess world champion, put it best when he said, we've effectively prostituted ourselves to these kleptocrats in this country in a way that makes it impossible now to turn around and say, whoa, behave yourself.
Well, he's exactly right. He's and he hit the nail on the head, which is that this country has decided, the current leaders of this country have made a decision, which is that money, it's better to look the other way and allow really evil, terrible criminals come here because they're spending money, And a very small group of people get this money. It's not like this money is sort of, it's not like everyone's getting the money here. I mean, so who gets the money from the Russians? I'll tell you who gets the money. There's a number of solicitors and barristers who get the money because they're all suing each other in courts here. There's a number of estate agents that get the money. And there's a number of art dealers, a few restaurateurs in a very small district of London that get the money. And it just so happens that these people all went to the same public schools and same universities as our current leaders. And so our current leaders are effectively protecting, 1/100th of 1% of the population and giving up the any kind of moral principles for these people.
Wasn't it ever thus? Wasn't there all? I mean, I think Balzac said behind every great fortune there's a great crime, and then there'd be lots of people following along behind the great fortune, hoping to pick up what falls off the back.
Well, and there certainly are a bunch of enablers in this country that are doing that, and unfortunately, our foreign secretary and our prime minister refuse.
You have appealed directly to them.
I've appealed directly to them on numerous occasions, and I've got many members of Parliament who have appealed to them. We've had an entire committee of Parliament propose imposing sanctions, and the government just ignores them.
This was long before the current situation. This was in direct response to the list you've compiled of officials in Russia who had their fingers in the till, as it were, the Magnitsky list.
And so I'm saying, what is so special about this particular group of torturers and murderers that we have to give up our principles and allow them into this country?
You see it that starkly. There is a simple, pragmatic trade-off between morality and material wealth that our leaders are making on behalf of their friends and their cronies.
Well, and so, for example, there's this terrible, horrible assassination using nuclear materials of Alexander Litvinenko.
Yes.
And the Home Secretary intervened in the inquest and said, we don't want this inquest to go forward because getting to the truth of an assassination might mess up business with Russia. I mean, that's just unbelievably immoral and shocking.
And not receiving the coverage that one might expect in this country. William, I'm going to go towards the news now. We'll return imminently. I'm sure as you listen, you'll understand why Bill Browder was so keen to come and talk to you today, and why I was so keen to hear what he said. Although I have to confess that I even as a journalist, I find some of the facts that he's sharing with us almost unbelievable. I'm also concerned for your safety. You mentioned Alexander Litvinenko. I was about to, because you are, in a sense, making the same enemies that he did.